Some days, loneliness isn't a place. It's a weight, a heaviness, right in the middle of your chest, like the whole world walked away and forgot to say goodbye. And the hardest part? No one notices. You might be smiling, working, replying to the family group chat. But inside, there's a silence that screams. You feel alone, even when you're surrounded by people, and you start to wonder if something's wrong with you, because everyone else seems to handle life just fine. And you're tired of pretending, of holding it in, of not being yourself. But here's something no one told you. Sometimes it's in the exact moment when everything disappears that everything actually begins. Because loneliness, the one that feels like a punishment, might be a gift in disguise. A strange gift, I know, because before it gives you answers, it will strip you bare of what others expect, of the roles you force yourself to play, of the versions you created just to feel accepted. True loneliness isn't the end of anything. It's the crossing that takes you to the only place where real happiness can be born, inside yourself. Hi, I'm Noah. This video isn't some big Hollywood production. It's just a way I found to share with you what I learned about myself today through what I've been learning from Carl Jung. Because maybe the moment I'm living through feels a lot like something you're living too. So if something I say here helps you feel a little less alone, just give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, YouTube understands that this kind of content matters to you, and it'll start showing you more of it. There's a kind of silence that's not just the absence of noise. It's a silence that presses on your chest, like someone turned off the world outside and pointed a spotlight inside you. That's when solitude starts to show its true face. At first, you try to fill the emptiness with distractions, lists, voices, noise. But there comes a moment when nothing distracts enough. And right there, in that space between the outer world and your inner one, fear shows up. Not the fear of being alone, but the fear of finally hearing yourself. Because when the world quiets down, the psyche begins to whisper. The ego, used to moving to survive, begins to drift in the stillness. And that stillness is the beginning of the inner journey. From it, things start rising that you didn't even know were still living inside you. Repressed desires, buried emotions, parts of yourself you once hid out of shame or need. Solitude throws open the doors that your routine kept locked, and suddenly, you're face to face with a psychic reality that feels too real to bear. Jungian psychology calls this the meeting with the personal unconscious. But you don't need the terms to feel what it means. It's like something inside you says, you can't run anymore. That discomfort you feel, that urge to run, to numb, to fill the space with anything, is just the ego trying not to look at what it spent years avoiding. But no journey inward begins without that first jolt. That shock is the key that opens the soul. And if you can stay with that silence just a little longer, you'll feel it change. What was dark begins to feel familiar. What looked like a threat becomes a sign. And then you understand. Solitude didn't come to hurt you. It came to show you, to show what still aches, what still beats, what's still alive. To show you the parts of yourself that are still waiting to be seen and to be loved. Solitude is just the mirror. You're the one who chooses to look or to shatter. That's when a new kind of listening begins. A listening that doesn't come through your ears, but through your skin, your stomach, your chest. A listening that sees each unconscious piece as a real part of your story. And it doesn't matter how strange or wrong they feel, they're yours. The ego will resist. It'll try to shrink, explain, deny. But the psyche doesn't answer to the ego. It wants to be felt. It wants to be heard. It wants to be fully known. That's when the journey truly begins. Not when you understand, but when you stay. Stay in the discomfort, the doubt, the fear. Stay with yourself. No mask, no audience, no need to look okay. Just you with you. Solitude becomes solid ground the moment you stop running. And that ground is rich. That's where the first roots of your soul begin to grow. The kind that doesn't need anyone else to hold firm, because they grow from within. Maybe you still think solitude means something's gone wrong. That feeling lost means you're weak. But it doesn't. It means something inside you is waking up. And every awakening begins with a scare. Every rebirth begins in silence. And it's in that silence that you finally begin to hear yourself. For real. There comes a point in solitude when everything starts to feel strange. Your clothes, your words, the gestures you repeat without thinking. Suddenly, none of it makes sense. It's like you don't know who you are without someone watching. The absence of the other removes the mirror. And when that mirror is gone, the mask falls. Not in some dramatic way, but quietly. A subtle discomfort, almost invisible, begins to crack the persona. That character you built to be accepted, to function, to survive. At first, it brings shame, because you start seeing how often you lied to yourself just to keep up an image. How much of yourself you've hidden. How you shaped your identity to fit molds that were never truly yours. And more than shame, you feel guilt for betraying yourself, for believing you had to hide your truest parts just to be loved. Solitude doesn't judge this, it just shows it. And that revelation hurts, because it shakes everything you thought you were. Jungian psychology calls this a confrontation with your complexes. These are parts of your psyche you've ignored, but they've been quietly shaping your choices, your fears, your relationships. In solitude, those complexes gain a voice, and they don't ask permission. They come as memories, as patterns, as feelings you can't pretend not to feel anymore. That's when the idealized ego begins to collapse. The version of you that tried to be liked by everyone, even yourself. When the persona falls, it leaves a strange hole, an emptiness that's scary, because you don't know what's going to rise in its place. But that space is where the hidden self begins to grow. The part of you that's always been there, waiting. Not because it was wrong, but because it didn't fit the role. Solitude gives you that gift, the chance to see yourself without filters, to hear the unconscious content that's been buried for years, and little by little, you realize maybe you've spent your whole life trying to be someone you never were. At this point, the conflict between who you are and who you tried to be becomes too loud to ignore. Your internal contradictions become clear, and this can bring a kind of grief. Grief for the person you never got to be. Grief for all the truths you swallowed. Grief for the parts of you you had to amputate to fit in. But this grief is sacred, because it's through that grief that your psychic reality begins to reorganize, not to go back to what it was, but to reveal what's always been there. And it's not easy. Some days, you'll want to put the mask back on just to feel a little safer, but it doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't work, because now you've tasted your own truth. And as terrifying as that may be, there's freedom in it. The freedom not to pretend. The freedom to exist with your flaws, your fears, your broken parts. The freedom to not be perfect, but to be whole. At this point, solitude is no longer just absence. It becomes a mirror that doesn't distort, that doesn't judge, that only reflects. And you may not like what you see. You may want to close your eyes, but it's in that raw gaze that healing begins, because it's there, in contact with what was denied, that the shadow stops being your enemy and starts becoming your truth. There's a moment when solitude stops being just silence and becomes a portal to everything you've spent your life trying to bury. Anger you never spoke, desires you pretended not to feel, parts of you thrown into the dark because someone somewhere once made you believe they were ugly, dangerous, or wrong. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, and in the silence of solitude, it returns. It comes as impulse, as strange thought, as emotion that explodes without warning. And then you wonder why you're reacting like that. But the truth is, it was always there. Those reactions that seem too much, the overwhelming anger, the sadness that comes from nowhere, the irritation you can't explain. They're signs of unconscious content trying to break through. The problem is, we were taught to fear those feelings, to believe that certain emotions are wrong, so we repress them, push them away. But the psyche doesn't forget. It stores them. And when you finally stop, when there's no one to impress, no mask left to hold up, it finds the opening and pours out everything you've tried to deny. And if you feel like going a little deeper, I carefully prepared a gift for you. It may look small on the outside, but it goes deep. It was made for those quiet moments when you suddenly notice you're here, but not really present. You're breathing, but not really alive. Inside, you won't find answers or fixes, but you might find a way back. Back to the parts of you that got left behind. Back to the gentle voice you stopped listening to. Back to your true self. The one that still remembers who you are. Not a better version of yourself. Not a new version of yourself. Just a whole version of yourself. You'll find the link to your gift right there in the pinned comment. So, if your soul is tired of moving through life without really feeling it, if your soul is tired of waking up and not knowing why, click the link now. Jungian psychology calls this the meeting with the shadow. And it's not a pretty encounter. It's intense. It's messy. It's visceral. You catch yourself doing things you swore you'd never do. Feeling things you thought you were over. Thinking thoughts that scare you. But all of it is you. Not the part you show, but the part you buried, deep in the personal unconscious. That part doesn't want to ruin you. It just wants to exist, to be seen, to be heard, to be welcomed without fear. But the ego resists. It tries to control, to explain, to erase. And that's where self-sabotage begins. When you silence yourself just when you need to listen. When you pretend you didn't feel it, didn't hurt, didn't care. But your body knows. The body always knows. And when you deny emotion, it returns as a symptom, an impulse, a pattern. The shadow doesn't want the spotlight. It wants space. It wants to live inside you without being treated like an enemy. It's hard to accept this, because there are things you never wanted to feel. There are parts of you you've been taught to hate. But what you reject controls you. What you welcome frees you. The shadow isn't a monster, it's a mirror. A mirror that shows you what's missing for you to feel whole. And it's in that confrontation that real transformation begins. Not when you get rid of the pain, but when you understand what it came to reveal. At this point, solitude is no longer the problem. It's the passage. A place where you can finally hear your rawest, most human, most difficult truth. A place where you stop pretending you're okay and start asking what's actually alive inside you. It might be uncomfortable, it might be scary, but it's real. And everything real heals, even if it takes time, even if it breaks you open, even if it makes you face places you've never dared to go. So if today you feel in conflict, if you've been sabotaging yourself, reacting without knowing why, maybe it's just your shadow asking to be seen, and it only shows up for those brave enough to stop and listen. And you stopped, and you're listening. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from outside or from something someone did. It's a pain that begins when you see yourself fully. No edits, no filters, no escape. When all your parts show up at once. The one that loves and the one that harms. The one that nurtures and the one that breaks. The one that shines and the one that's ashamed to exist. Seeing yourself like that, emotionally naked, feels like falling into yourself and landing in a deep, dark sea full of pieces of you that had never met before. And that meeting, as necessary as it is, hurts. It hurts because it's real. Psychic reality doesn't come gift-wrapped. It comes raw, rough, layered, and when you start to see all that you carry, not just the wounds, but the defenses you built to hide them, you want to pull back, to wear the mask again, to pretend everything's fine. But you can't, because now you've seen it. And once something is seen, it begins to change. Even if it hurts, even if it shakes everything, even if it leaves you on shaky ground for a while, that's when something new begins to rise inside you. It's not peace, not yet, but it's a bridge, a strange feeling that two parts of you that once fought are now starting to talk, that the ego, once so stiff, is now listening to the unconscious with a little less fear, and the unconscious, once so wild, is beginning to soften into words. This is the birth of the transcendent function, not as theory, but as a new silence between extremes, a place where the soul can breathe. Jungian psychology speaks of integration, but what you feel isn't a concept. It's a sensation in your body. It's the cry that comes from nowhere. It's the chill in the middle of the night. It's the urge to be still, not from sadness, but from reverence. Reverence for everything you are, including what you were never allowed to be. Because now those parts are coming back. The disowned ones, the hidden ones, the ones trapped in complexes you inherited without knowing. And they don't return asking for forgiveness. They return asking for space. To see yourself whole is the opposite of trying to fit in. It means you no longer have to shape yourself just to belong. Your pain no longer has to be hidden. Your contradictions aren't mistakes, they're your depth. Your feeling of not fitting in was never failure. It was a call, not to fix yourself, but to come back to yourself. And at this point, you begin to see the pain wasn't your enemy. It was the signal that lost parts of you were coming home. This raw beauty that comes from facing yourself can't really be explained. It can only be felt. It's your body feeling lighter after crying. It's your gaze softening after the storm. It's silence becoming comfort instead of threat. And it only happens when you stop running from what you feel. When you accept the hardest task of all, being whole. With everything. With fear, with anger, with light, with shadow. Because you're not a broken half. You're a whole self, slowly remembering who you are. And if it hurts today, maybe it's just because you're finally seeing clearly. And that clarity heals, even if it burns. There comes a moment when silence stops feeling heavy. It starts to hold you. Solitude, which once hurt, now feels like home. And what changed wasn't the world, it was you. Because something inside you stopped running, stopped judging, correcting, trying to be something else. And then, for the first time, you listen to yourself without urgency, without rushing to fix, to understand, to explain. You just listen. And from that listening, something rare is born. An inner company that asks for nothing. It simply stays. And being with yourself becomes a pleasure, not a punishment. You start to see there's beauty in that inner place, that there's stillness, even with noise, that there's space, even with pain. The psyche stops being a battlefield and starts becoming a home with open doors for everything that lives inside you. Light, shadow, memory, impulse, longing. It all fits, because now you're not trying to control everything. You've learned how to regulate with care, to let things come, let them go, to trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't. Jungian psychology calls this self-regulation of the psyche, but the name doesn't really matter. What matters is the feeling. It's your body no longer tensing at every little thing. It's your breath-finding rhythm. It's your mind learning to be okay with not knowing. And it's through this emotional maturity that something new begins. The pleasure of being alone. Not the kind of alone that means abandoned, but the kind that means deeply present. The kind that comes when you've learned to rely on yourself. Not out of pride, but out of tenderness. Because you've realized you don't have to run from yourself anymore. This pleasure isn't excitement. It's comfort. It's knowing you can sit with your shadow and not fight. You can listen to your anger without acting out. You can cry without shame. You can laugh for no reason. You can just be with all that you are. Inner company is born when you stop treating yourself like an enemy. When you begin to live inside your psyche as a sacred space. A space where you don't have to prove anything. Just be, and that alone is healing. Dwelling in yourself is an act of courage, because it asks for patience with your chaos, gentleness with your emptiness, compassion for the parts that still ache. But it's through that dwelling that life starts to take on a new texture, simpler, softer, quieter, and you begin to understand. Solitude was never a punishment. It was an invitation to come home, to the home that is you. And if today you feel that quiet calm that doesn't come from outside, that comfort born from stillness, celebrate it, because it's a sign that you've arrived. You've arrived in yourself, and now you can rest and stay. There comes a time when you realize that thing inside you that scared you the most doesn't want to destroy you. It just wants to be heard. The shadow, which once showed up as sabotage, outbursts, or pain, starts to change its tone. Not that it becomes soft, it stays intense. But now you listen. Now you don't react the same way, because something inside you has stopped fighting. It understands that denial only feeds what lives in the dark, and that welcoming doesn't mean surrender, it means integration. Jungian psychology calls this shadow work, but really, it's just you learning to talk with what you used to silence. It's the ego loosening its grip and learning to listen with respect, with humility. It's the shadow for the first time, feeling accepted, not as a threat, but as part of you. And that changes everything, because when the shadow stops being the enemy, the unconscious starts to cooperate. It stops screaming and starts creating. Slowly, you begin to see that what felt like chaos was actually symbolic language, that behind the anger, there were boundaries. Behind the sadness, there was longing. Behind the impulse, there was an old wound. And behind the pain, there was a plea for love. All the things that once seemed meaningless begin to take shape. Inner shape, symbolic shape. And then creativity begins to flow, not as performance, but as honest expression of what's alive in you. Integration isn't magic. It's slow. It's quiet. It's made of small gestures, pausing before reacting, welcoming before judging, listening before concluding. And suddenly, you realize there's space inside you. Space to feel without guilt. Space to exist without shrinking. Space to create without hiding. Because now, your inner world is more cooperative, more whole, more real. And that truth doesn't hurt the way it used to. It holds you. This is what it means to build psychic wholeness. Not perfection, but fullness. A state where light and shadow no longer constantly fight. They dance. And that dance is yours. With your rhythm, your pace, your story. There's no script, just presence, just listening, just the courage to be exactly who you are, someone becoming. And if today you feel less war inside, if you feel parts of you finally walking together, celebrate that. Because that's not small, that's integration. And integration is freedom. The freedom to exist without constantly splitting yourself in half. The freedom to be without apologizing for being whole. There's a kind of solitude that doesn't hurt, a solitude that loosens your chest instead of tightening it. It's a living solitude, full of presence, a silence that doesn't frighten, but comforts. You reach this state after many falls, many inner confrontations, many days of battling your own soul. And then one day, everything quiets down, and that silence isn't empty. It's a temple, a place inside you where everything settles, where light and shadow stop fighting and begin to coexist. That place is the self, not as theory, but as a feeling. It's when you sense in your body that you don't have to split anymore, that you don't have to hide or prove anything, that you don't need to be only light to be worthy, or hide your pain to be loved. The self appears as an inner center that welcomes everything, the ugly and the beautiful, the calm and the chaotic, the clear and the dark. And that kind of deep acceptance gives rise to something rare, a happiness that doesn't scream, a silent happiness that lives in the peace of being whole. Jungian psychology speaks of this reconciliation as a symbol, but a symbol isn't something distant. It shows up in the simple things, in the way you breathe, in the way you treat yourself, in the way you look in the mirror. It's the gesture of no longer running, of no longer abandoning yourself, of being a presence for yourself. And this transforms solitude into sacred space, a space where you meet the deepest, truest part of who you are, the part that never needed approval to exist. The inner temple has no walls, but it has roots, and those roots are your silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of listening. Listening to your body, your soul, the pulse beneath your thoughts. This silence is symbolic. It's in that silence that the self whispers. And what it says isn't an answer, it's a remembering that you already are, already enough, already whole, already worthy, even with pain, even with shadow, even with all the scars you carry. This is the moment when solitude becomes fertile ground, when you stop searching outside for what was always inside, when you discover that happiness isn't excitement, it's rest, it's being at peace with what is, it's knowing that nothing's missing, that there's no need to run, that you can simply stay with yourself, with your soul, with the truth that doesn't change with time. And if today you feel that serenity that doesn't depend on anyone, celebrate it, because that's the self showing up, not as an idea, but as a living symbol, a symbol of healing, of renewal, of silent joy, a joy that doesn't need to be seen, because it's already felt. And that is everything. After you've truly gone through solitude, nothing feels the same, not because the world changed, but because you did. Need becomes presence. Urgency becomes stillness. Solitude, which once hurt, now holds. And when you return to the world, you don't come back empty, asking for something. You come back full of silence, of listening, of soul. The shadow has been welcomed. The psyche has found its center. And from that place, you begin to relate to others, not to fill holes, but to share truth. It's beautiful to notice you no longer expect others to save you, that you don't need to shapeshift to be accepted, that the fear of rejection has been replaced by a quiet certainty that you already belong, not because others said so, but because you've come back to belonging to yourself. And that changes everything. You begin to listen more, to judge less, to touch with presence, because you know what it means to be alone. And those who've met their own emptiness learn to respect another's space. Jungian psychology calls this individuation, the process of becoming who you are without losing yourself in the collective. But what you feel isn't a theory. It's ground, a steady ground in your chest, a place where you meet yourself before meeting anyone else. And from there, your relationships transform, because now you don't demand, you offer. You offer real presence, words that hold, silence that doesn't pressure, eyes that don't expect, a soul that touches without invading. This symbolic return to the world isn't about going back to normal life. It's a new way of being alive, a way where the outside no longer controls everything, where relationships are no longer crutches, but pathways of sharing, of listening, of depth. And that heals connection, because you stop projecting your inner pain onto others and begin to see them as they are, with light, with shadow, with story, just like you. The world doesn't become easier after solitude, but it becomes more inhabitable, because now you have a home inside. Now there's a living soul in everything you do. And that soul isn't looking for applause. It's looking for meaning. Meaning in being here. Meaning in loving. Meaning in slowly building what's real. And it's that meaning that begins to stitch together the scattered pieces of your life. And if today you've returned to the world a little quieter, a little deeper, a little more whole, honor that return, because it's rare and sacred. It's a sign that your solitude became root, and now you can belong without losing yourself, because you're not just in the world anymore, you're in yourself, and that changes everything. And if something I said reminded you of your own story or stirred something inside you, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd really love to hear it. What you have to say matters, not just to me, but maybe to someone else who's going through something similar. Sometimes putting it into words is already part of the healing. If something inside you still wants to understand yourself, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. And maybe what's in there is exactly what you've been needing to hear. Click it if that's where your soul is asking to go.